All right, so welcome everyone to the first of our Learning Forward Florida webinars. So, we're kicking off our webinar series tonight, and we're going to have them throughout the year. Some months we actually have conferences, virtual conferences, and other events. So, I'll talk a little bit more about that at the end, but we'll be kind of interspersing the webinars in between our other virtual events. So, here's some reminders for this evening. Please remember to mute during the session when you're not talking because there's background noise typically, whether you realize it or not. And of course, you can unmute your microphone to ask a question if you need to. You're also welcome to drop questions in the chat as we go along. But if you're not speaking, please just keep it muted. If you're willing to keep your camera on, I know everybody's situation is different, but it can certainly help humanize the learning. So we would love to see your faces if you're able to have your camera on. So I am super excited tonight to have Krista Lay here with us. I've been a big fan of Krista's and following a lot of what she does, and I'm so excited that she'll be able to share her passion and expertise with you tonight. So I have some of her information on the screen so that you can connect with her if you want to. If you want to follow her on Twitter, her website and her email address are also up there. So, Krista is the founder of Resonance Educational Consulting, and she actually began her career 23 years ago as a high school social studies teacher and curriculum coach. In 2012, she was one of only 26 educators in the country selected as an ASCD Emerging Leader. And over the past 10 years, Krista has worked with educators in more than 25 states on creating sustainable, scalable SEL systems and learning communities. And this year, she will earn her EDD in educational leadership from Lehigh University. So that's a huge accomplishment. Congratulations. And so we are just super excited to have her here with us, kicking off our webinar series. Um, and really such an important time to be thinking about and talking about social emotional learning. And we know that Krista has not just the expertise in the topic, but really a passion and an excitement for it. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that Krista can start sharing hers, and I will go ahead and turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Naomi. I am so thankful to you and to Florida Learning Forward for this wonderful opportunity. Let me get my presentation up and going there. Thank you. I, as Naomi said, have been incredibly passionate about social emotional learning even before it was called SEL. And so my first years working in school districts outside of my own were on how to help teachers implement and integrate social emotional learning into their classrooms and the different entry points that they could use in order to get there. My research then moved on to how can we help create sustainable, scalable systems for social emotional learning. And so I'm really thrilled to have an opportunity to present at the Florida Learning Forward conference next month on that research and our practices on how we help school districts create those sustainable systems and the factors that are necessary for that. Tonight's work, though, is offered up as a start to the school year. And knowing that we've been through some traumatic social, emotional, political upheaval in the last 2 years, we're really looking at now social emotional learning coming into the spotlight and gaining attention. And how do we keep the focus on SEL? And so for the last couple months, I have been talking with educators and with students about what do you need, what do you hope for, what do you wish for in order to start this school year. So I'm hoping that tonight's session will give you some practical tips and tricks on how to integrate social emotional learning into your classroom to not only kick off the school year, but to keep it moving throughout the rest of the time. So, as we get started, I just wanted to clear up some misconceptions that you might have around social emotional learning. There are lots of different types of frameworks that talk about what SEL is. And I found that about 20 years ago, the absolute best research based company organization out there is CASEL, Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning. And oftentimes when we talk to people about SEL, they'll say, oh, it's about relationships. And yes, it is. But then I want people to step back and realize that it's not just relationships. There are actually 5 different parts to social emotional learning. The first 2 have to do with intrapersonal awareness. So self-awareness and self-management. The next 2 are interpersonal competencies, social awareness, and relationship skills. And then the last one is responsible decision making. In the work that I've been doing with schools over the last 6 years, we're finding that there is a focus on self management and relationship skills, but often the 2 that are overlooked are self awareness and social awareness. And so when we're looking at what are we doing within our school systems, within our classrooms, we really want to make sure that we're hitting all 5 competencies. I'm also of the belief that if we don't do the really critical work around who we are in social emotional learning, those intrapersonal pieces, we won't be able to establish the authentic, deep connections and rapport with others. So, our intrapersonal competencies influence our interpersonal competencies. And then all 4 of them together can help us make more responsible decisions. I also wanted to share that there has been a shift in the last year around the details among social emotional learning. So before we get into some of those tips and tricks, I just wanted to bring an awareness that they have deepened according to CASEL. So what we see here are the 5 competencies across the top and what I call the descriptors or the indicators going down. So for instance, if I was working with teachers face to face, I'd say pick one of those competencies and tell me what skills do students need to have in order to be successful in life within self awareness, within self management, social awareness, and relationship skills. And hopefully, we would take a look and see what skills do you think need to be developed and then compare them to CASEL. In October of 2020, CASEL released an updated version of social emotional learning. I'm going to show it to you in a moment, but it is a little bit overwhelming if you haven't seen it before. And so the boxes down at the bottom are just a little bit to help you focus on what those new shifts are. So under self-awareness, there is a change where we're intertwining identity much more deeply. And so in self-awareness, we're looking at, do students know their social, cultural, linguistic identities? Do they understand the biases and the prejudices that they're socialized with? In self management, oftentimes people think about stress management and impulse control, but we don't want to forget about goal setting. And are they able to set goals and actively work towards them? There is a renewed emphasis on empathy in social awareness, but not just empathy for people who we are familiar with, but also people who have different cultures than what we have ourselves. The last part I'd like to add in here is that there is a part that talks about understanding the role of systems on individuals and their behaviors, and really looking at how systems are created, who has power, and how that influences everybody within that system. Over onto relationship skills, there is a focus on building relationships, but also then maintaining them and understanding that conflict is a natural part of life. And how can we work on navigating conflict so that we have successful outcomes for everybody involved? And then lastly, under responsible decision making, they focus not just on ethical decisions, but also really caring decisions as well. And so when we talk with educators about this, there's often this stress that, well, I didn't learn about this. I don't know how to do this. And and I can relate to that as a social studies teacher when the literacy standards came out, for instance. I'm like, I didn't go to school to be an ELA teacher. I don't know how to do this. And what I realized is I don't have to know everything. I don't have to be an expert, but I can do something. And that all of us as educators don't have to do all of these different pieces. But if we can really establish a connected community among our staff in our schools, we can all contribute something to supporting the social emotional well-being of our students. Oftentimes, people will not see how it relates to their content. And so, for instance, when we talk about the scientific method, that's responsible decision making. When we talk about how you feel when you're stressed out, like doing a math problem, perhaps that can bring in about self management and setting goals and working towards achieving them. We know that we could talk about self awareness in art, and we could talk about social awareness in ELA and relationship skills in social studies. So it's really about how we make this part of the climate and the culture of our schools. So take a deep breath. I'm going to show you the updated competencies. And it's just an idea, and I see some smiles there, of reacclimating yourselves to these different pieces. Um, it is interspersing diversity, equity, inclusion, and access into these competencies. And oftentimes, and to be quite honest, there's a lot of conversation around the country on should this actually be part of a school curriculum as part of what we do in school. And the answer is yes, because what pieces up here do our students not need in order to be successful in life? And there are lots of different ways of doing this, but we of integrating it. But we know that if we want our students to be successful, it's not just what they know, but it's how they're able to interact with other people. So we can come back to this, but today we wanted to focus on what are some of those pieces that we can start working on as the school year starts, because we know that our students are coming to us with stress and anxiety. And we know that there are lots of programs out there that address social emotional learning. But I'm of the mindset that SEL is not a program. If we keep putting it down into that acronym of SEL, it changes the way we think about it. If we think of it as social emotional learning, we understand that that's a process. And SEL is not a program that you put in for 20 minutes a day or once a week. It is who you are and what you do every day. It's what's up in your physical environment. It's the social expectations you have in class, your non-negotiables for how people treat each other. It's the conversations you have when students want to give up because they're frustrated. It's how you interact with people, and it's everything about who you are. And so we, even as adults, need to come back and think about how are we doing on each of these 5 competencies. And we don't need to be experts at it, but we do need to be continuing to learn and grow. And like Dr. Maya Angelou says, when you know better, we do better. And so I'm not perfect in all of these, but I'm constantly looking to strive on a daily basis. So given everything that our students have experienced and that we as educators have experienced this year, we know that based on research from 70 years ago, the way that our brains work, and this is a really basic way of looking at it, is that we have 3 parts of our brains that interact with each other. The reptilian part of our brain is down at the base of our head in the back near our neck. And this is our fight, our flight, or our freeze. These are the pieces that help us with breathing, if regulating our body temperature, letting us know if we're hungry, if we're tired. Over top of that is our limbic system. This is, are we safe? Are we valued? Do we feel accepted? And so here we're talking now about our physical safety and our emotional safety. And we know that if we are not feeling physically and emotionally safe, the neurons in our brains are going to be firing like crazy here. Now, add on top of that, especially for adolescents, that the limbic system is where all of our different chemicals are coming, like the testosterone and the estrogen and oxytocin and all of the hormones that help regulate our emotions. And so we know that if our students are not physically and emotionally safe, they are not going to be able to access their neocortex to its highest level. The neocortex is where that higher order thinking is happening, where the language is being developed, where they're able to synthesize and move towards higher level critical thinking and creative thinking. And so oftentimes our students will have a feeling and respond without getting a chance to let that settle. So there's a stimulus and then the immediate response. And if we don't focus on social emotional learning and give them an opportunity to have their brains calm down, we're not going to be able to access their higher order thinking where they can learn. So when we feel safe in the presence of other people, biologically, we are able to breathe easily, which means we're getting oxygen into our bodies. Our heartbeat is regulated. We're not sweating. We can think clearly and we feel open and in sync with the other people around us. Now, given that a majority of our students have been out of school in the last 2 years, we need to think of a way of how we are going to welcome our students back into a community that they haven't been in, or that they've been in, but not with the high number of students that they're used to. I was working with a school district 2 weeks ago, and they were meeting with their juniors, and they realized that their juniors in that school were not aware of the traditions and the values and the routines that they were just that most juniors were used to, because they hadn't been back in the building since January or February of their freshman year. Thinking about the anxiety and the stress that our students might be having as they come back in, and us as educators as well. So based on this framework, there are some codes as we go through this presentation. And what I tried to do is give us a tip or a trick, and then add in if it's helping out the teachers process of becoming more confident in social emotional learning, or if we're working on the students becoming more confident. And the great thing about the way that SEL works is that when we get to know about our students, we are also given an opportunity to practice social emotional learning. So if you see an SA that's talking about self-awareness, SM is self-management, and so on, and they are color-coded to try to help out as we go along. I also almost tripped up and said strategies, and I really try to stay away from the word strategy, because oftentimes people will say, just give me an SEL strategy. But what works for me and my personality and my context in the classroom might not work for somebody. So by understanding social emotional learning really deeply and thinking about how we work with students best, we are able to adapt different tips and tricks and strategies to make them our own. So let's start off with just a couple tips and tricks for educators as we get started on this school year. You may have seen something like this before. Actually, if people could give me a thumbs up, have you seen this before? It's called a blob tree, and you can find it online. It is written by or created by a man named Pip Wilson. And so it's a way of being able to check in with students or with educators to see how they're feeling in that moment. And so oftentimes I will start off a session and say, if you could pick a blob, which one best represents you right now? I'll also add in that there is no shame or blame. People can be number 7, and that is okay. I want people to feel safe in being honest and authentic about who they are and where they're at. Now, I'm the one who put the numbers in here, and they're really accessible. If you go to Blobtree, I think it's blobtree.com, you can download these images for like $3 a piece. They also have ones that are related to content and Likert scales, so you can check in with students. So knowing which blob represents you focuses right in on self-awareness. And one of the reasons why I really like these blobs, and I'm seeing Amanda's loving them too, there's some really great pictures there, is that they are amorphous, and we, whether we're staff or students, can see ourselves in here. So sometimes our students don't have, oh, and Janice says yes too. Sometimes our students don't have the words to put in how they're feeling, but they can say, oh, that's me, and here's why. I do have to tell you, I also love this because there are lots of different perspectives you can take. I had a teacher in a town near me who, when I was asking them to pick which one they were, had his shirt up over his head. And I checked in, I'm like, how are you doing today? He's like, I'm doing great, thank you. I said, well, which blob are you? And he said, number 20. I said, really? Tell me more about that. And he says, well, that's me. That's chest hair, isn't that? And I thought, oh, I thought it was a flower, but from his perspective, it was chest hair. And Naomi, you are right. This works well with students and with adults. I use it in all contexts. Number 16, I've had students tell me it's a teddy bear or it's a cookie. Some people said that blob is protecting, or perhaps afraid it's going to be taken away. Number 19 could be either praying or perhaps crying or meditating. Number 10 could actually be 2 separate people. And so it's really working on getting a story from the students on where they're at. I would also encourage you to have students talk about where they at different times of the day, or how they feel about different content. So that's around the self-awareness piece. I'm seeing other people saw that as a cookie as well. And how we move that into self-management is, where do you want to be by the end of, let's say, the day? So now we know, here's where you're at, here's where you want to be. What do you need to do? So we're giving them agency. What can you do? You can take control in order to get there. Or what do you need from me, from us, in order to get there? So introducing something like the blob tree allows people to think, where am I at? Where do I want to be? And how can I get there? What resources and supports do I need? I think about this now too, to be able to monitor and adjust my own behavior, because I know that I need to show up a certain way for the people that I'm working with. Same thing with educators working with staff. But I put this here under the educator part because I want us to start reflecting on our own feelings, where are we at, and be okay with that, but then think, where do I want to go? And how can we model that for our students? Thank you, Naomi, for putting that in the chat. It is blobtree.com. The other thing, I was just in a school district in Pittsburgh a couple days ago, and I started thinking about, how can we really set intentions or goals for ourselves as educators for the year? Because we know that once the year gets going, it is going to be a whirlwind, and there's so much that is unknown. So I provided everybody with a 3x5 card that had what is in dark blue printed on it. And I asked them to think about, what is your greatest wish for your students this year? What you see in light blue is how I would answer this. And for me, as a high school teacher, it was really important that students felt seen, valued, and heard. And so knowing that that is my wish, what actions am I going to take? What do I commit to help ensure that every student feels seen, valued, and heard? And for me, it's something that's called mapping relationships. So the intention here is to write it down, to put it somewhere that you can continually come back to it on a daily basis, because we know what it's like in education. You're pulled in lots of different directions. You start to get stressed, start to get anxious. How can we grab back again? I often call this stashing joy. I like to keep stickers, different colors, memos around me that my kids have written. I'm the mom of 3 teenage boys. See these things pop up, it gives me a whole new sense of well-being. And so what can we do to remind ourselves and ground ourselves? The back of this card says, this is what I want to do. What am I going to do in my practice to make this part of a routine? So what's in, again, dark blue is what I provided to them. And then what's in light blue is my example. So having 6 classes of up to 30 students, I would want to have positive one-to-one interaction with every student every week. My biggest fear was thinking about the Breakfast Club and how the one girl there, Allison, showed up on a Saturday morning. And by the time we got to hear her story, it was because she had nowhere else to go and she was ignored. And I don't want any student to come into my classroom and feel that they weren't seen or valued or heard. So moving this now into a daily routine, I also need to monitor my progress. So how am I going to do that? Who is going to be my accountability partner? And I encourage teachers to do this at the beginning of the year, to really say, what is essential in teaching and learning? What is my greatest hope, my greatest wish? If nothing else this year, this is what I want for my students. Let me go back just a moment. So as you could see down here, that is self-management for us, and then responsible decision-making as well. How are we putting this goal that we've created into practice? I did just want to pull out this connecting with a recharge partner, because it's really important to find somebody near you that you can touch base with and say, hey, can you keep an eye on my classes for a couple minutes? I really need to debrief with you. We need to have an outlet where we are able to get a hold of our emotions, because if one of our students is up here, us coming up here to meet them is not going to bring them back down. So who is that trusted partner or colleague that we can touch base with regularly to be able to process the day and to debrief? That is social awareness when we get to share with somebody else. And then relationship building when we are able to decide how we are going to enhance and build that relationship in a positive way. Now let's move on to what we can do for students. Here is another version of the blob trees that I absolutely love. And this is, I'm seeing Naomi laughing. This is one of my favorites. I have about 20 different on a scale of, and I like to swap them out. And I'll ask the students, which dog best represents you right now and why? So as a teacher, I'm bringing this back in because we have to routinely check in on our students. Oftentimes we do this. I feel like looking, Amanda, I should have a cat one as well for you. I do have some cat ones. We need to do this routinely. We're so good at doing this in the first 2 weeks. Oh, I'm saying yes, and number two, wanting to be wrapped up. We're so good at doing this in the beginning, but we don't carry through with our students. And we really do need to think about how we can do that on a regular basis for them. For us as a teacher, that's the T up there in the top left-hand corner, we are working on social awareness, finding out where our students are at, and then being able to respond to them. So if you ask them how they're doing, but then don't follow up with the ones who look like number 8, we're not doing our job, to be quite honest. So if we're going to ask our students how they're doing, we need to follow up on and show them that we're there for them. But in that process, we are helping them work on self-awareness. And if we do a turn and talk to somebody else, now they're working on social awareness. We also know that some of our students, loving that as a parent as well. Yes, I do that. Actually, I talk to my kids about this. I said I have 3 teenage boys. We have these conversations regularly. The other piece that I wanted to share with you is that sometimes our students and our children don't have the words to express how they're feeling. And so we need to work on establishing an emotional vocabulary with them, emotional literacy. It's also important, looking at sustainability, that we are creating a culture with a common language. And so I offer these just as some ideas to think about. What is on the left is Plutchik's Wheel of Emotions. And while I love the way this looks, I'm not a huge fan of the actual words in the center, and I don't think I use those with students. But what this shows here is the intensity of the core emotions that we all have as humans. And then as it goes out, it decreases in intensity, but they're all related to each other. And so this could be something where you're weaving it into language classes or different words, talking about what are different synonyms that could go with these words and these feelings. And also, if they're opposite of each other, they are antonyms. The other piece I wanted to point out is if you take a look at the words in between, like optimism and love, submission, awe, disappointment, those are feelings and emotions that are a combination of multiple emotions and feelings. So optimism is vigilance and ecstasy. Contempt is actually rage and loathing together. And so oftentimes students may have this rush of emotion, but not really know how to pull it apart. And something like this could help them with those words. On the right-hand side is a different version of the wheel that I actually prefer those words and I would probably use those in class. But I think it is important for students to have access to something like this, to think about what words could be associated with the blob tree, so that they build up their emotional literacy. So for a teacher, we're again focusing on social awareness and relationship skills. Students are focusing on self-awareness. And if you have them think, where do I want to be and how can I get there? They're working on self-management. I would be remiss if I didn't bring this piece up for our students. And it is important, especially for our younger kids, to be wearing masks to protect themselves. But in wearing those masks, they're missing out on nonverbal cues. And so we know that the vast majority of our communication skills are done nonverbally. And so especially for our teachers of our younger children, what can we do to help get them thinking about nonverbal communication, full body, and with our faces as well? So for instance, our friend here on the top right, are they sad or are they worried? Are they nervous about something? Our friend in the middle, are they angry or are they perhaps overwhelmed or excited about something? And our friend on the left looks to be happy to me, but maybe there's students who have something else to add in here. And so we want to be able to build up part of that emotional literacy is social awareness, and not only recognizing emotions in themselves, but can they recognize emotions in other people? And then what are they going to do about that? How are they going to respond? And that is that is relationship skills. Just keeping an eye on my time here. Please feel free if you have any questions to put them in the chat, or to feel free to unmute. I love what Shannon put in here about shades of meaning, going back to Plutchik's wheel. I've also seen elementary teachers who have gotten the paint strips at Home Depot or at Lowe's, and had so there's different shades of yellow, and they'll ask students to come up with different words that they're using. The other piece that I would like to offer, and I'm sure that many of us as educators already do this, but we have to be really clear about what are our non-negotiables going into this school year. What are those boundaries that we're going to set in order to keep students physically and emotionally safe? I don't like to call them rules. We can call them boundaries or classroom commitments, but I can tell you that our students are saying that they just want to be heard. They need to have a voice. And actually, after being online where they could chat most times that they wanted, or using Mentimeter or Padlet, they are used to having their voice heard, even if they're not vocal, or even if they're not verbally speaking up. And so the work that I've been doing the last couple of weeks, helping teachers to prepare for the beginning of school, is what are your non-negotiables for your classroom? So for instance, mine were respect for yourself, respect for others, responsibility for your actions, and resiliency. But I also wanted to get the student on what do they need in a classroom to, how do they learn best? And so I'd encourage our educators to, once you have your non-negotiables, how can you get input from your students so that you can co-create those classroom commitments? And in doing so, you're learning about your students right away, and that is social awareness. Your students are thinking about how they learn best and what they need, which is self-awareness, and hearing where other people are at and what they need in order to be successful is also social awareness. I have been on Clubhouse since about January, and I've met some really amazing people, educators throughout the country. And there are some educators who talk about the first five. Now, in elementary school and in middle school, the teachers have a lot of flexibility with, we want to have a 20-minute morning meeting, or before we transition to this subject, we're going to take time to have this conversation. And in a high school, it's not as easy to do that. So what we are encouraging people at the secondary level to do is what's called the first five. Now, that means the first 5 minutes of class, establish routines where students can take advantage of soft starts to the learning. So what does this look like? When I was in the classroom, we were told you need to teach bell to bell. If the administrator, and I'm seeing some head nods, if an administrator came in the first 2 minutes and we weren't teaching, or if the kids were talking to each other in the last 2 minutes, we were going to get in trouble. But we know, and the students have said, going from class to class to class to class to class without having a chance to decompress is very stressful. So in this first five, you would establish a routine where students who need to calm down might want to listen to music, or might want to take some time breathing or journaling or doing some silent meditation for 5 minutes. Maybe you have some students who need a pick-me-up and they're going to listen to a different type of music, or maybe they're going to grab some coloring books and color for a little bit. Working at a middle school after school program before COVID hit, we found that doing soft starts where we introduced friendship bracelet making to students and giving them word games and puzzles to work on was also a way to help them calm, because you're doing repetitive movement with your hands that is working on calming the brain. During this first 5 to 8 minutes of class, you could be checking in with students. After you do that check-in, maybe there's a student who's struggling that day. You could use that time to check in with that student. Perhaps there is somebody who was absent and you want to check in with them. Maybe there's a student who, in an exit ticket the day before, you found needed some additional support. So those first 5 to 8 minutes could be used to individualize instruction. For us as educators, we are working not only on responsible decision making, but also social awareness and relationship skills. For the students, we're giving them the tools to recognize their emotions and thinking about how to manage them. I did have a teacher in New Jersey last week say, but what do you do if the student is having a reaction or a behavior, disruptive behavior because of their emotions? How do you get them to think about those soft starts? And what I'd like to present is that it's really hard to do it in the moment when our students are at the end of their rope and they're up here. We need to establish these routines before those emotions and feelings start. So as the school year starts, how can you establish routines in your classroom so students know they can maybe go to the back of the room because there's a seat there, or it's okay if they put their head down on their desk for 30 seconds and do some breathing exercises. You get to establish that climate in the culture, and we just encourage you to take time to do that. The other piece that I saw, a dear friend of mine from ASCD let me zoom into her classroom. It was elementary and in the third grade classroom. And the teachers set weekly goals for the students. Actually, let me back up. The students set weekly goals for themselves. The teacher set the framework. One of the more popular ways of doing this is called the WHOOP, goal setting framework, and is from the University of Pennsylvania. And it stands for, what do you wish would happen? What does that ideal outcome look like for you, very specifically? So that's where we get specific, measurable, timely, relevant. And then what possible obstacles may keep you from achieving your goal? And then lastly, what are you going to do, or what resources are you going to gather to help you get there? So every Monday, these third graders would open up their journals and write their goal for the week. It could be academic, social, or emotional. And then on Friday, they did a reflection to say, here's where I'm at, here's how it worked, and then leave themselves a note for that Monday. Do they set another goal? Do they extend their goal? Or do they think about shifting it around a little bit? So again, for teachers, we're working on social awareness. But for students, it's self-management, because they're setting goals and then they're actually actively working on them on a regular basis, responsible decision making. We know that there is research out there, specifically from Karen Osterman at Hofstra University on Long Island. Years ago, she was looking at mean girl bullying behavior. And then she expanded it to include the boys, and then she expanded it beyond middle school. And what she found was, it boiled down to this: the more I know about you, the less likely I'm even to think about hurting you. The more I know about you, the less likely I'm even to think about hurting you. And so we have to take an active role in creating a community of connected learners among our students. We know that we as humans like to be with people we're comfortable with. We will sit in the same spots. We will pick the same partners if we are able to. And I would like to offer that as educators, we don't let students pick their own partners. We might say something like, find somebody who has the same type of shoe that you have, or the same color hair or same color shirt on right now. Or maybe we're grouping them based on formative assessment data and differentiating. I've also asked people to get up and to walk around the room and greet people with a high five, a fist bump, an elbow bump, and then said stop. And whoever they were about to wave to would be their partner. I've also been really explicit that if you see somebody who's in between partners, you grab them and you become a triad, because I don't ever want anybody to be left out. Working in groups, I've also had my high school students write on a note card their name and 3 or 4 people that they can work well with in the class. And then I promise them that they will be in that group with at least one other person. And so I do mix up the groups so that they get an opportunity to work with one person that they're comfortable with, plus 2 or 3 new other people. I just feel very strongly that we need to ensure that all of the students have opportunities to connect with each other in academic and in social ways to help establish that physically and emotionally safe learning environment. So for us as educators, I look at it as it's a responsible decision making. We're making caring and ethical decisions. For students, we're working on the interpersonal skills so that they can learn at high levels. So in the first five that we mentioned earlier, one of the things that I used to do in my high school with my high school students is put little games or questions in the first slide. So while I was taking attendance or walking around or meeting with different students, I often used Mind Trap, which were different lateral thinking puzzles for students. And I would put up on the board who their new partner was because I could put it into a slide. Or you could call out different numbers with popsicle sticks and partner people up. But for us as educators, I think it's a part of being a responsible educator, making responsible decisions. For students, it's another way of interpersonal skills. And because it's not academic, it takes a little bit of that pressure off and that anxiety off and allows it to be low risk. Speaking of conversations, and I know this is a big slide here, but I wanted to be able to give you as much as I could without having additional paperwork here. We know that our students are going to need support with having academic and social conversations. In fact, I've heard teachers say the same thing. When we get up to talk, we're not used to communicating with each other, especially face to face. And so, how can we provide scaffolds for students to start those conversations? And it might sound silly right now, but I really think we need to take a couple steps back. And instead of saying, well, you should know these SEL skills or you should be able to have these conversations, just accept that this is where students are at. And then what can we do to meet them to help them take the next step forward and to develop socially, emotionally, and academically? One of my favorite resources is from the New York Department of Ed, and they call them accountable talk sentence starters. What you're looking at right here are an example of grades 3 to 5, but they also have K to 2, 6 to 8, and 9 to 12 as well. And so this could be something that you put up on the board or in slides. We do this even in staff development with educators. Partner A says this, partner B starts with this sentence stem. Then we switch, partner B starts, and then partner A. Over time, students will start to internalize these, and you might have a couple students who still need to have it on a note card with them, but now you're looking at differentiating that level for them. But I think coming out of the gate and having them come back to school with the assumption that they can do these pieces might be doing them some disservice. Last thing I have to share with you before we wrap up our time is that I know we've provided a lot of ideas on what you can do, but you still might be thinking, how am I going to do all of this in my classroom? Because agreed, our goal is still to help students achieve academically, but we can't have one without the other, SEL without academics, and we can't have academics without SEL. And so I'd like to offer this idea of station rotations and that you don't have to do things full group. And how could you get working with students in small groups in the first week? You might be familiar with Catlin Tucker. And I'm sorry, I realized that some of the wording got cut off a little bit, but she had just put out a blog on August 1st that talked about how to start the year with station rotations. And so this gives students an opportunity to work online and providing information about who they are. Then the second station might give them, they're talking about how they can add to the non-negotiables in the classroom and what they need in order to feel physically and emotionally safe. Then perhaps you have an area where some small groups are working on what does it mean to collaborate, and you're giving them sentence starters. There might be a station where they're looking at the syllabus and they're looking at what the goals are for the year. There could be another one. I love this one on growth mindset because that goes back to self-awareness again. And then lastly, there could be one where the teacher is working with the students in small groups to get to know each one on an individual level. So I'd really recommend thinking about how you could organize these in a way that allows for you as the educator to be able to work with all of the students and establish that one-to-one rapport while you're building the rapport up among the students. The last thing that I'd like to leave you with is I had an opportunity to work with Dr. Joe Murphy, who is professor emeritus at Vanderbilt University. And he has been in education for many, many years. And he got up to speak to our group and he said, if I could give you one piece of advice, it is to keep one eye on challenge and one eye on care. And that just blew me away, what he was saying, that we have to toggle back and forth. Our students will not grow or take a step out of their comfort zone if they're not feeling cared for. And some days our students need more care than they need challenge. Some days our students need more challenge than they need care. And it's our role as educators to work with them to figure out what that looks like. And for some students, it'll be 50-50. For some students, you're going to need to go 90 and the students can maybe go 10. But the idea, the hope is that over time, over the class year, they'll be able to start taking more steps forward, Vygotsky zone of proximal learning, because they know that they're cared for and that they are supported. So I know I wanted to give you a whole lot there that you could walk away with and think about. I thank you for your time, for your willingness to participate and jump on. If you click on that QR code there with your phone, that will save my information for you, but feel free to email. If you have any questions, if you'd like to talk about social emotional learning, what it looks like in terms of integration or what it looks like in terms of district-wide implementation, I hope that you'll join in on the Florida Learning Forward conference in September when we talk about those 3 factors that you need for sustainable social emotional learning. And as we work on wrapping up, I am happy to take any questions or thoughts or ideas, anything you have to share that you know works well for you, because we are all better together. So thank you for this opportunity. I look forward to seeing what you have to share or what questions you have.
Well, I'll go ahead and start. Hi, it's
Yes,
Amanda.
please. Hi.
Thank you so much. This was not only obviously evidence-based, theoretically sound, but I just love how you packaged it with, like you said, the quick tips and tools and tricks to make it very practical. And all I can say is I just want more. So I'm so excited that you're going to be with us next month and we'll have an opportunity to learn from you again, Krista. This was absolutely fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the feedback.
So yes, our Learning Forward Florida Fall Conference will be a virtual conference and it's September 20th through 21st. I'm dropping a website in the chat so you can find out more about the conference and register online at fastdonline.org. And you can hear more of Krista at the conference. And then the keynote speaker is Ricky Robertson, and he'll be discussing building resilience. So to continue this thread of social emotional learning and really digging deeper into this both in our professional learning and in classrooms as well. And if you didn't already know, the state for different purposes is split into 5 regions. And at the Learning Forward Florida conference, you also have the opportunity to collaborate with people within the various regions of the state. And it can be really neat to see what's going on around you. And then sometimes the meetings are even split by district size, because we know that implementation of these tips and tricks can look different depending on the size of the district that you're in. And of course, we would love your feedback. So I have the QR code here. I'm also going to drop the link in the chat. So thank you so much, Krista. This has been amazing. I was so interested. I couldn't even multitask if I wanted to. So that's always fun. And so, yeah, if anybody else has questions or comments for Krista, we'll just open it up.
Amanda, I think I saw you just unmute. I love questions, so.
I did. I was going to try to share some space with my colleagues here because I know I already vocalized my appreciation, but I do have a question.
Sure.
And it's more of just kind of that common tension I sense, I hear, I remember, and I feel from leadership that while we all know that this is very, very important, and as you said before, oftentimes leadership will be pushing more for utilizing and harnessing the power academically of all of our instructional minutes. So what suggestions do you have to I guess get leadership to give themselves permission to allow their teachers to provide those 5 minutes in the morning, or really provide the focused instructional minutes on not just academics all the time, but also social emotional learning practices?
Yes. I think it comes back to looking at the data, honestly. And I know data is sometimes bad word in education, but allowing data to inform our decisions. And so when we look at the research that is around integrating social emotional learning, this is research from 2011. CASEL, they've also redone it and replicated the studies in 2017. And it was at all grade levels. Now, there were more elementary and middle than there were high school, admittedly, but it was in rural, urban, and suburban areas. It included students in all socioeconomic classes, all races, ethnicities, genders as well. And what they found is that even with a 1 year program, they found that the short-term benefits was that it started shifting students' attitudes towards learning. They were more willing to be engaged in the learning. They wanted to come to school. They were more invested in the classroom. What they saw then is a transition in terms of, so that was short-term benefits. Midterm benefits were that because there was that shift in attitudes, there were changes in behaviors. There was an increase in pro-social behaviors. There was an increase in attendance, an increase in participation in class. There was a decrease in antisocial behaviors. And then the long-term benefits were that the academics started increasing. And so they saw, I think it was 11 to 17 percentile gains, and it was in math, science, and ELA. They did not look at social studies. Now, one of the other things that I would offer, and because I've worked with a lot of school districts, county schools in Georgia, and we looked at their health data that was reported, because in some of those school districts, the students were doing really well academically, like having 4.3, 4.4 as a GPA, but all the health survey data that was coming back said that the students were stressed, they were anxious. There was a high percentage of students who had suicide ideation. And one of my own children actually deals with a lot of anxiety. And so we know that even if we take the academics aside, if our students are achieving highly, they're still stressed and struggling socially and emotionally. And we also know that if they're struggling socially and emotionally, they're not always going to achieve. So again, coming back to the practical pieces of what do we want for our students. And in all of the districts that I've worked in, I start off with, what is your greatest hope for your students? I swear in 15 years, no district, no students, or I'm sorry, no administrators and no staff have ever said that they want their students to be proficient on whatever the state tests are, or to get a certain score on the SATs. It's all about wanting the students to be well-rounded, to have them feel healthy, to have healthy relationships with each other. And so we have to be courageous. And I know it's not easy because there's money that's tied up in those state tests. But if this is what we're saying we want for our students, we really need to put that at the forefront of what we're doing. I know that was a really long answer, but I hope that that helped you a little.
Can I add to that thinking?
Yes, please.
So, Krista, I work in Hillsborough County in our transformation network. So in our lowest performing schools, our 45 lowest performing schools. So obviously our children come with a lot of trauma. So there's a huge, I feel like last year, everybody was so worried about just getting kids to school that we forgot about all of that important stuff like SEL and equity, and it just kind of got pushed aside. And this year, I think what our leaders are recognizing is it's not just the students that need it, but our teachers as well. And so we've really been trying to, as my PD team has been trying really hard to remind teachers that even though you're trying to do this for your kiddos, you need to be doing it for yourself, because if you don't bring yourself, if you can't be present at school, your kids won't be present. And I wanted to add that this year I tried like deep breathing practices with kindergartners on the first day of school who couldn't calm down because they were so nervous, and it worked like a charm. Like just breathe in, breathe out, counting to 3. And I was like, wow, it really does work.
Yes. And can I tell you a personal story? My brain goes all the time. And I'd always say, I can't meditate. I can't do that. When COVID started, I did start trying to teach myself how to meditate and meditate. Not in the beginning, I admit I was full out sleeping. Yeah. I wasn't really meditating, but I did get better at it. And now I do a 10 to 15 minute meditation in the middle of every day where I'm not sleeping. It is a practice that can be worked on, but it can look different for everybody. There's lots of different ways to do that. And so teaching those breathing exercises, even at the high school level, students might joke around about it, but if you keep it consistent, it does work. So thank you so much for teaching the little ones how to do that.
Oh, well, it's so sad to see like a 5-year-old who's freaking out in school, and you're like, it's going to be okay. We all love you as much as your mommy does. It'll be okay.
Yep. He's 16 now, but it started when he was in 5th grade. And as an educator, I knew what was happening, but as a parent, I was beside myself, looking at him screaming and having a meltdown and calling the counselor saying, I need help. Can you meet us at the door? Because I can't get him on the bus. I can't get him out of the car. So I have a lot of empathy for the parents whose students are experiencing that.
So I think, Amanda, if we can tackle the adults and help them understand how it helps them, then they will buy into it. Because I don't know if you guys have heard of Inner Explorer. It's like a computer-based program that teachers can use in their classroom. That's like a meditation. It's like a 10-minute meditation. And we've offered it to our schools for free for a couple of years. And whenever I get on a call with the company, they're like trying to convince me that mindfulness is important. I'm like, you don't have to convince me. I get it. Yes. I will use it at home. I don't care. It's trying to get the leaders and the teachers to take that 10 minutes out of the day. Like that, taking that time out of the day is going to give them time on the back end.
It's actually investment. It's investment for the whole child, not just academics as well. And making sure that they see that connection.
And helping the teachers realize when I would say, I'm tired of people telling me to take time for myself. How do I do it? I said, no one else is going to do it for you. You have to do it. Even if it means you lock yourself in the bathroom for 10 minutes, or you put on a movie, or let the kids play on the iPad. It's okay. Right. But you need to be okay with you. And our implementation framework, I took the research around the factors for sustainability and the work we've been doing in practice for integration and put it together. And the whole first year is around building a deep awareness of social emotional learning among the staff, not asking them to do one more thing yet, but having them reflect on how it impacts who they are and their relationships with other people, including the students, and SEL messaging, and really how it connects to the mission and vision of a school district.
Yeah. I just wanted to add, Amanda, one of the things that we saw in the protocol last year, which Krista is where we go into districts and look at a specific aspect of their PD system. One of our districts picked their MTSS, professional learning around their MTSS. And so we actually went and observed some of their MTSS teams in action. And I think one way that principals could sell it, or to the district, if they wanted to do that 5 minutes at the beginning of class, is that the MTSS teams are so stressed right now. I know, like, in just one elementary school in this district, which is one of our high performing districts, they normally have 20 kids referred a year to the MTSS team for social emotional learning needs, and they had over 200 last year. So like they're they had a school psychologist, they had a school social worker, but they just didn't have the time to actually be able to get through the process for all of those students. So if this could be a way to maybe handle some of those kids that are on that lower tier, if the teachers could do that 5 minutes a day, that would really take stress off of these MTSS teams who with the Delta variant now are probably going to be even more stressed.
Mhm.
You're right. We have to build capacity. This is, again, it reminds me of the literacy standards. This can't just fall on one group of teachers. We all have to take ownership for a part of it, at the very least.
Love it, Jenna. Incorporate it, right? It's part of a strong core right there. So, and to be responsive to, we know students are coming in to our doors now, and our staff full of trauma more than ever, more so. That's predictable. This is the time to inject our strong core practices with this as well, and not wait for it to be a tier 2 or a tier 3 sort of just some or few kids getting introduced to this type of work. For sure.
If you don't mind me adding in, if the work that we do too, we consider SEL to be tier 1. As they move into students who need extra support, we look at the developmental assets from the Search Institute. So it's search-institute.org. They have 40 developmental assets that they say students need in order to survive. I think they recommend, they say their research shows that students need 31 of them. And right now, on average, our students have about 21. So there are some specific ways that you can start building assets among students who aren't ready for high tier 2 or tier 3, interventions. There's also some new research from them called the developmental relationships, which is fabulous for looking at mapping relationships and helping to reach out to the students who need the most support, and ways to step-by-step build relationships, because some teachers need a little bit more support with that than others. So,
can you say that again, Krista?
yes, so actually, let me,
oh,
I'm sorry, I should put it in the chat.
thank you.
It's the other, besides CASEL, we institute. Their research is brilliant, and I'm happy to send you some things too, but we have developmental assets processes that we help teams. I used to be on the SAP team. We called it Student Assistance Program. I had something similar. We had 1,100 students, and 200 of them one year were referred to the team, and we needed to do something different. Developmental relationships. There you go. So just another resource that could help you as you're working on building capacity and providing additional support to students.